25 days. That was exactly how long I had to lick droplets of water from limestone stalactites just to cling to life in absolute darkness. Robert, my son-in-law, and Jason, his partner in crime, were likely clinking glasses, celebrating what they believed was the perfect, bloodless murder. They thought abandoning a 4-year-old woman in a flooding cave was the flawless way to seize my fortune without leaving a trace. But they made a fatal mistake. They forgot that the woman they looked down upon wasn't just a senile mother-in-law. She was a geography teacher who had spent her entire life reading the language of stone. They wanted to use nature to kill me? Well, I used that very knowledge to survive and come back to haunt them. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. There are stories that, no matter how painful, must be told. They didn't know that the mother-in-law they wanted to eliminate could read stone like reading an open book. I reached a higher point, a sort of plateau that, by the formation, seemed to stay above the water level, even in the biggest floods. There, leaning against the cold stone, I made my first camp. I tore a piece from the hem of my skirt and tied it around my wrist. Each knot I tied would be a day past. I needed to keep a sense of time so as not to go crazy. That first night, if I can call it night since in the cave it was all just darkness, was the hardest. The sound of the water, filling the lower tunnels, echoed like a big beast breathing. The cold penetrated my bones. Hunger wasn't pinching yet, but thirst was already scratching my throat. I thought about drinking the floodwater, but I knew it could be contaminated. I needed to find clean water. I remembered the classes I taught about limestone caves, how stalactites formed pure drops of water filtered by the rock itself. You know, limestone isn't just lifeless rock. It's Mother Nature's greatest filter. While the floodwater swirling beneath my feet was thick with mud and bacteria, those drops traveling through yards of stone above had been completely scrubbed, cleaner than any bottled water you could buy. That's basic geography. But on that day, it was the thin line between life and death. In the dark, I used the last flash of the flashlight to locate some formations above me. I stretched out the scarf I had around my neck and positioned it to catch the drops falling slowly. The water came drop by drop, but it was pure, crystal clear. While I waited for the scarf to accumulate enough water, I took a mental inventory of what I had with me. A small Swiss Army knife that I always carried. Inheritance from my boatman father, who used to say that a prepared woman is worth two. A light jacket tied around my waist, the clothes on my body, a scarf around my neck, and the flashlight that would soon be completely out of battery. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I felt my pockets one more time and found a pack of saltine crackers I had taken from the hotel breakfast. Never has a simple cracker tasted so good as in that hour. I ate only 2, saving the rest. I didn't know how long I was going to be there. I needed to ration. Sleep didn't come easily. Every noise, every drop, every echo seemed like a monster or a ghost in the total darkness, but exhaustion ended up winning. I dreamed of the Sacramento River of my childhood, with my father rowing the boat, showing me the fish shining in the clear water. I woke up startled, not knowing how long I had slept. The darkness remained the same, absolute, impenetrable. But something had changed. The sound of the water had diminished. The rain outside must have given a respite. It was my chance to explore a little more, try to understand the place where I was stuck better. I got up slowly, my muscles sore from the cold and the uncomfortable position. Feeling the walls carefully, I began to map the environment around me. My hands, now my only eyes, discovered different textures in the stone. Places where the rock was more porous, others where it was smooth as glass. I found small crevices through which passed air that was slightly different, fresher, perhaps coming from some distant opening. I mentally marked these points. They could be paths, or at least sources of renewed air. In college, I learned that every cave has its own breathing, its own air circulation patterns. Understanding this could be vital in the coming days. In that moment, the realization hit me hard. It wasn't a nightmare. I wasn't going to wake up in my bed in Los Angeles. I was really trapped in a floodable cave, betrayed by the men my own daughter had chosen as partners, with no one knowing where to find me. The only person who might suspect something wrong would be Sarah, but she trusted her husbands blindly, and even if she suspected, How was she going to find me in that labyrinth of stone that wasn't even on the official maps? That was when I understood, with a clarity that only desperation brings. It depended exclusively on myself. The nature that I spent my whole life studying in books would be my salvation or my grave. I decided to use the knowledge I had in my favor. The formation of that cave, from the little I could observe before staying in the dark, was of the type that generally has more than one entrance. Natural drainage systems usually create multiple openings over thousands of years. If I could map the place using my other senses, maybe I would find an alternative exit, or at the very least, a safer place to wait for a rescue that, honestly, I didn't even know if it would come. It was at this point that I began to formulate my survival plan, a plan that would depend as much on what I had learned in books as on what I had learned from life. The first days were the hardest. My body, accustomed to the quiet routine of a retired teacher, protested against the cold, the hunger, the thirst controlled by drops. The system I created to collect water from the stalactites worked, but it was slow. Each precious sip had to be planned. The crackers ran out on the third day, and then came the true trial. I had been 72 hours without eating in a cold environment that sucked my energy. But instead of giving up, something inside me hardened. A strength I didn't even know I had began to grow, fed by indignation. But let me be honest with you, before the anger came the heartbreak. In those long, shivering hours, waiting for the water to recede, I didn't just feel the cold of the stone. I felt the freezing cold of betrayal. I thought of every Sunday lunch I had cooked for Robert and Jason. I thought of how I welcomed them as sons, how I defended them when others doubted their intentions. The physical darkness of the cave was terrifying, yes, but it was nothing compared to the darkness in a human heart capable of leaving an old woman to die alone. I cried then, not for fear of death, but for the death of the love I had given them. Have any of you listening right now ever felt your heart shatter because the people you loved most stabbed you in the back? Let me tell you, the chill of the stone was nothing compared to the coldness of the human heart. If you've ever had to swallow your tears just to find the strength to keep going, please, leave a comment and share it with this old woman. We are not alone in this. I had to let that part of me, the naive, trusting mother-in-law, die in that water so that the survivor could be born. I wasn't going to give Robert and Jason the satisfaction of my death. I was going to get out of there and look into their eyes while justice did its job. In that absolute darkness, my other senses sharpened in a way I never imagined possible. I began to hear things that before would pass unnoticed. The sound of small animals moving, the subtle difference in the echo when a space opened or closed, the distant murmur of water following its natural course. My sense of smell began to distinguish the humidity of different areas, places where the air was more stagnant or fresher. And my hands became my eyes, reading the history of those stones through textures, temperatures, inclinations. It was with these hands that on the fourth day I found my first great discovery: quartz crystals embedded in the wall of a narrow corridor that climbed upwards. Even in the almost total darkness, I managed to feel their distinct shape, different from the limestone around. With the Swiss Army knife, I pried off some of these crystals. I didn't know yet what they would be good for, but something told me they could be useful. I put them in my jacket pocket and continued my methodical exploration, always leaving marks I could feel on the way back to my base camp on the elevated plateau. A geography teacher lost in a cave. If it weren't so tragic, it would be funny. But hold on. Before going straight to the end, I have to start this story from the beginning of my life, because to understand how a 4-year-old woman managed to survive 25 days in a cave, you need to know where this old woman came from. And I came from the waters, the muddy and generous waters of the Sacramento River, which cuts through Sacramento like an open vein. I was born in 1,947 inches, a simple house with a high roof, with a beaten earth floor and walls of a faded blue that my mother, Miss Helen, repainted every single year. My father, Mr. Arthur, was a boatman, one of those men who seemed to have been born already knowing how to read the river, predict the flood, guess where the fish are hiding. His thick hands had more history than many books I would later read at the university. Since I was tiny, around 5 or 6 years old, I already accompanied my father on trips along the river. While other fathers left the girls at home helping in the kitchen, Mr. Arthur would say, "My daughter is going to know the world, And the world at that time was the Sacramento River, with its curves, its stones, its stories. Mom complained, said the river wasn't a place for a girl, that I was going to get dark as coal from so much sun. But my father answered with that gentle way of his, better dark from the sun than dim in the head. And so I grew up, divided between the simple school in Sacramento and Mr. Arthur's wooden boat, which for me was the best classroom in the world. It was on the boat, sitting on the prow, with feet dangling near the water, that I discovered my passion for stones. There was a part of the river where the banks were all exposed rock, forming designs that seemed to tell stories. "Dad, why is the stone all folded like that?" I would ask. And he, who barely knew how to read and write, but knew that river like the palm of his hand, would answer, "It's because the earth is alive, Patty. It moves slowly, slowly, but it moves." That stone there was once soft mud deep down, which got squeezed, squeezed, until it turned hard. It wasn't the scientific explanation I would later learn in geology books, but it planted in me the seed of curiosity that never stopped growing. My father taught me to observe the signs of nature, how the color of the water changed when it was going to rain hard at the headwaters, how certain plants only grew in certain types of soil, how stones told the history of millions of years in their layers. Everything you need to know about life is there, in the river and in the stone. He would say, water always finds a way, even in the hardest stone. And stone, as strong as it may be, one day was something else, and one day will turn into something else again. The philosophy of a simple man that ended up becoming my north when the waters of life got turbulent. In school, I was a diligent student, not because of pressure from home, since my parents barely had schooling, but from an internal desire to understand things. When the teacher talked about maps, distant countries, how the earth was formed, my eyes would shine, unlike the other boys and girls who only wanted to know about playing. And it was this passion for knowledge that made me the first person in the family to finish what they called high school back then. I remember as if it were today, the day the principal called my mother to the school. I thought, geez, what nonsense did I do? But it was to say that I had potential to try for college in Los Angeles. Mom came home confused. College, university, that's for rich folks, my daughter. But my father, after listening silently, smoking his pipe on the porch, said, "If that's what you want, Patty, then that's what it will be." It was a huge struggle. In those times, in 1969, a poor girl from the interior going to study alone in the big city wasn't something you saw every day. But Mr. Arthur sold the old boat, bought a smaller and simpler one, and with the difference paid my ticket and the first month of boarding in Los Angeles. I remember crying the whole way on the bus, afraid of the big city, missing in advance the smell of wet earth after rain, my mother's strong coffee, my father's whistle returning from the river at the end of the day, but also with a determination in my chest that not even I understood properly. I arrived in Los Angeles with a cardboard suitcase tied with string, a new notebook, and the promise I had made to my father, I will come back, graduated to teach what I learned. Los Angeles swallowed me and transformed me. In the first months, I thought I wouldn't make it. The city was too big, too noisy, too fast. I lived in a cheap boarding house near downtown, shared a room with 3 other girls, each coming from a different corner with a different dream. I worked during the day as a clerk in a bookstore near Pershing Square and studied at night for the entrance exams. The owner of the bookstore, a Portuguese gentleman named Mr. Walter, let me study during quiet moments and even lent me books. "A girl striving like this deserves help," he would say. It was in that bookstore that I met Edward. He was Mr. Walter's nephew. He had recently returned from a stint in New York, where he had gone to try life. It didn't work out there. "I'm going to try here," he told me on the first day. Edward was different from the guys I knew. He spoke softly, listened more than he talked, and had a way of looking that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. We started as co-workers, then friends. And when I realized, I was completely in love with that guy with glasses and a shy smile. I passed the geography entrance exam at UCLA on the 3rd attempt. When the list of admitted students came out in the newspaper, Edward bought a simple bouquet of flowers and waited for me at the exit of the boarding house. "I knew you would make it," he said, with that smile that made my heart race. It was on that same day that he asked me to be his girlfriend under a tree in MacArthur Park. I accepted, of course, How could I not? There was a man who believed in me more than I did myself. Attending university while working was no cakewalk, let me tell you. There were days I arrived at the boarding house so tired I could barely eat dinner before falling into bed. But every class was a discovery. Every book was a treasure. When I had the first classes on geomorphology, the study of Earth's forms, I felt I had found my place in the world. It was as if all the questions I asked my father on the boat could finally be answered. Why does the stone fold like that? How are caves formed? Why do certain rivers run in one direction and not the other? It was like learning the grammar of a language I already spoke intuitively. I graduated in 1975 with Edward and my parents in the audience. Mr. Arthur, already in fragile health, made a point of traveling to Los Angeles. It was the first time he set foot in the capital, and he kept looking at everything with those curious boy's eyes, the very same eyes he taught me to have. At the ceremony, when they called my name, I saw him wipe a tear with the sleeve of his starched white shirt, the best one he had. In that moment, I understood that my achievement wasn't just mine, it was his, Mom's, everyone who came before me without having the same opportunities. Edward and I got married the following year. A simple ceremony at a church in Santa Monica, with few guests, but much joy. Mr. Walter, who already treated Edward like a son, gave us the management of the bookstore as a gift. I'm old. I want to rest. You run the business and give me a percentage of the profit, he proposed. It is truly heartwarming to see Patricia and Edward building their American dream from scratch, isn't it? They earned every bit of that stability through pure grit and honest work. But sadly, where there is a legacy being built, there are often vultures waiting in the wings. Keep listening to see who enters the picture next to threaten everything they worked so hard to create. That was how we started our life together. Me teaching in public schools and helping in the bookstore in my spare time. Edward taking care of the business and taking night courses in administration. Our daughter, Sarah, was born in 1978, a name chosen carefully because that was what she represented for us. The victory of two young people from the country who, against all odds, had built a dignified life in the big city. Sarah was born with her grandfather's eyes, that same curious shine. From a young age, she showed sharp intelligence and determination. She takes after her mother, Edward would say, proud, but I knew she took after him too. That sensitivity, that way of caring for others. Our little girl grew up among geography books, maps spread across the living room table, and the smell of new paper from the bookstore. In the years that followed, our life took shape like a river finding its course. We weren't rich, but we lived with dignity. With much sacrifice, we managed to buy our first property, a small but well-located apartment in the Westwood neighborhood. We saved every penny. Edward had a little notebook where he noted every expense, however small. One day, we'll give Sarah a better house, he would say. And we really did. 10 years later, we bought a bigger house in Santa Monica. The bookstore prospered modestly. My classes were increasingly recognized, and I even managed to get a master's degree in geomorphology, specifically studying the rock formations of the Santa Monica Mountains. Sarah grew up and decided to study dentistry. It wasn't what I secretly hoped for. I had dreamed she would follow my steps in geography. But we supported her choice with all our hearts. The important thing is to do what you like. My daughter, I advised, repeating what my father had told me so many years before. She graduated with honors and soon opened a small office that later grew with her dedication. She met Robert at a dentistry conference. He was a few years older, a successful real estate agent with a smooth tongue and an imported car. I confess I didn't like his face at first, but I kept my opinion to myself. Who was I to judge? The important thing was that Sarah seemed happy. Our third property came later, already in the 2000s. A large plot of land in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood, an area that was appreciating in value. Edward, always visionary, insisted it was a good investment. When we get old, if needed, we sell and have a good cushion for health, he planned. At that time, Sarah was already engaged to Robert and doing a specialization course. Life seemed to follow the right course, like a calm river after the rapids. But then Sarah introduced us to Robert's friend, Jason, a business administrator recently divorced. The two had met in college and kept the friendship. Jason always showed up at our house, had dinner with us, told funny stories, was attentive to Edward, whose health was already failing. I like this guy, my husband commented once. He has good energy. Again, I didn't share my feeling. There was something in Jason's look that didn't please me. A calculating glint that appeared when he thought no one was watching. But as a mother-in-law, I learned to keep quiet. If Sarah is happy with the groom's friend, who am I to make a fuss, I thought. Sarah's wedding to Robert happened in 2005, in a much larger and more pompous ceremony than ours had been. Edward insisted on sparing no expense. "My only daughter only gets married once," he said while signing checks for the buffet, decoration, band. I hoped it was true, that it was a marriage to last. The surprise came when less than a year later, Sarah told us that Jason had asked for the hand of her best friend, Jessica, who was also a dentist and worked in the same office. It was a quick wedding, almost rushed. And so, in less than 2 years, Edward and I gained 2 sons-in-law who soon became partners in a real estate venture. Life continued its course. I partially retired from school, but continued teaching some classes and doing consulting work on environmental preservation projects. Edward passed the bookstore to a trusted manager, appearing only a few times a week to check the accounts. Sarah and Jessica expanded the office, forming a respected dental clinic. Robert and Jason created their own real estate agency, selling mainly high-end properties. We gathered on Sundays for family lunches, where everything seemed perfect on the surface. But as a good geographer, I knew that surfaces can hide deep faults. The first signs appeared subtle, like the beginning of erosion. I noticed that when I entered the room, conversations between Robert and Jason were abruptly interrupted. Documents were turned over or put away in a hurry. Complicit glances were exchanged when they thought no one was paying attention. Once I caught a snippet of conversation, "She won't need so much space." And when I asked what they were talking about, Jason answered too quickly. "About Jessica's new office, Mrs. Patricia." But the tone didn't match the content. Edward, my safe harbor for so many years, departed in 2017, a heart attack while sleeping, without causing trouble, as he always said he wanted to go. When my time comes, Patty, I want to go like the river enters the sea, without fanfare, just following the natural course. And so it was. I woke up in the morning, and he had already gone, the serene expression, as if he were just sleeping a deeper sleep. The pain I felt was as if a part of me had been ripped out, but I didn't even have time to grieve properly. As soon as the wake was over, Robert was already there with papers to sign, talking about organizing the estate and facilitating the transition. That was when I realized how my life had changed. Suddenly, I wasn't the respected teacher, the matriarch of the family, but the widowed mother-in-law who needed to be taken care of. Robert started suggesting that I sell the house in Santa Monica. "Too big for you alone. Mrs. Patricia, too many stairs, too much garden to take care of." Jason endorsed it. "We can find a small apartment, more practical, close to Sarah's office." My daughter, so busy with the clinic and so confident in her husband's advice, just agreed. "Mom, they only want what's best for you." I resisted. Of course I resisted. That house held 30 years of memories of mine and Edward's. Every corner had a piece of our history. The room where Sarah grew up, the porch where we celebrated so many birthdays, the small office where I prepared my lessons, surrounded by maps and books. How could I give that all up? "I'm not selling anything," I said firmly when I can no longer take care of it alone. "We'll talk." It was the first time I saw an expression of genuine irritation cross Robert's face, quick, soon replaced by the usual commercial smile. But it was there like a geological fault that appears for a second and then hides, but keeps growing underneath. The following years were of constant pressure, subtle but relentless. Whenever we met, the subject returned. "The real estate market is great right now, Mrs. Patricia, but it could drop, or that land in Pacific Palisades is in an area that will be rezoned, better sell soon," and the most frequent. "Don't you think this house is too much work at your age, at my age?" As if 60-something years was the end of the line. As if a woman who had raised a daughter alone in Los Angeles in the 82nds, who had done a master's degree working 2 jobs, who had survived the loss of her husband, couldn't handle a house. I gradually pulled away, preferring to stay alone at home than endure that constant siege. This, of course, only fed their speech that I was becoming isolated, needing company, showing signs of depression. Words that Robert and Jason repeated to Sarah like a mantra, and that she, in turn, used in our increasingly rare and tense conversations. I felt I was losing my daughter to those men and their agendas. In 2021, I had finally retired definitively from school, after staying on longer than I should have. 4 decades teaching geography to children and teenagers in Los Angeles should have been a moment of celebration, of recognition. Instead, it was used as another weapon. Now you'll be even lonelier at home. It'll be good to sell soon. Start a new life as a retiree. We can help manage the money from the sales, as if I were incapable of managing what Edward and I had built with so much sacrifice. That was when the surprise arrived. At a Sunday family lunch, Jason announced, "Mrs. Patricia, Robert, and I prepared a special gift to celebrate your upcoming 75th birthday early." Robert completed, "A trip to Malibu. You always speak of that place with such affection, of the research you did there." "We thought it would be perfect," Sarah clapped, enthusiastic. "Isn't it wonderful, Mom?" They planned everything. Indeed, they had planned every minute detail. I confess I hesitated. Something in Jason's overly animated tone bothered me. But then I thought, I'm being paranoid. They are my daughter's husbands, fathers of my future grandchildren. Maybe I'm seeing problems where they don't exist. And besides, the idea of returning to the Malibu canyons, after so many years, was tempting. I had done my master's research there, knew several of the formations, had wonderful memories of the place. Maybe it was exactly what I needed. A return to my academic roots. A reconnection with the nature I loved so much to study. I accepted. We agreed to go 2 weeks later, just the 3 of us. Me, Robert, and Jason. Sarah couldn't go because of commitments at the office, and Jessica was pregnant with her first child, unable to travel. I packed a small suitcase, separated my blood pressure medication, put in my pocket the Swiss Army knife I inherited from my father, more out of sentimentality than thinking I would need it. After all, we were going to hotels and guided tours, right? Little did I know that knife would be the difference between life and death. The trip to the Santa Monica Mountains, the main base area for exploring the canyons, was quiet. Robert drove. Jason was beside him in the front seat, me in the back, watching the landscape that changed gradually, from the dense constructions of Los Angeles to the vegetation of the canyons and, finally, to the impressive rock formations. My heart raced when I saw the first hills of the region. It was like meeting an old friend. "Look there, Sandstone Peak," I pointed enthusiastically like a girl. Robert smiled in the rearview mirror. "You're going to love what we prepared." We stayed at a simple but charming inn in the canyon area. On the first day, we did the traditional tours, the scenic overlooks, the waterfalls seen from above, some tourist spots. I was genuinely happy, remembering places I had studied, seeing how some things had changed and others remained exactly the same, immutable, as only stones can be. For a moment, I let my guard down. Maybe I had misjudged my sons-in-law. Maybe they really just wanted to please me. It was on the second day that they mentioned the special tour, Mrs. Patricia began Jason at breakfast. "We set aside today for a place that few tourists know, a spectacular cave that a local guide pointed out to us," Robert chimed in. "We know about your interest in geological formations. This place has impressive stalactites and isn't commercial. No crowded trails or artificial lights that piqued my professional curiosity. A less explored cave, in a more natural state, was tempting. We left the inn early in a rented pickup truck. We took increasingly precarious roads, until there was no road anymore, just dirt trails between the typical chaparral vegetation. I noticed we were moving quite far from the conventional tourist circuits. "Are you sure you know the way?" I asked, already a little apprehensive. "The guide gave us detailed instructions," assured Jason. "And we have GPS," completed Robert, showing his phone. What he didn't mention is that in that remote area, the signal soon disappears. After hours of trail, we arrived at a clearing. From there, according to them, we would have to continue on foot. The vegetation was denser, the terrain more irregular. Robert took 3 flashlights from his backpack. He handed me the smallest one. "You won't need much range, Mrs. Patricia. The cave has several natural openings that let light in." Another lie. The sky that day was heavy, dense clouds accumulating. It was late October, the beginning of the rainy season in Southern California, a detail that, as a geographer, should have alerted me. But the excitement of exploring a new cave spoke louder. We walked about 40 minutes along an almost invisible trail. Jason went in front, opening the path, Robert behind, as if ensuring I wouldn't give up. When we finally arrived at the entrance of the cave, I was genuinely impressed. It was a relatively discreet opening in the rock, but it promised a complex system inside. It is absolutely terrifying to watch her walk into this trap with such innocent excitement, isn't it? Every red flag is waving, the weather, the isolation, their positioning on the trail, but she's walking right into the belly of the beast. Hold your breath, because once they step into that darkness, there is no turning back. The limestone formation was evident, with clear signs of karst dissolution, exactly the type of environment conducive to interesting speleothems. My professional gaze momentarily overrode the growing sense of unease. "Let's go in. We brought water and some snacks," said Robert, adjusting his flashlight to maximum power. We entered. The first few meters were narrow, but soon the space opened into a wide hall with a high ceiling. The acoustics were impressive. Every sound echoed multiple times. The temperature dropped several degrees as soon as we entered. It was humid, with several puddles on the floor indicating infiltration. My eyes of a geographer specialized in geomorphology immediately noticed the watermarks on the walls. "This cave floods in the rainy season," I commented, more to myself than to them. Jason seemed to stumble at that moment, almost dropping his flashlight. But now looking back, I know it was a reaction to my comment, a startle of someone who has their plan partially unveiled. "We won't stay long," he replied, recovering his composure. "Just enough for you to see the most beautiful formations." We continued walking, entering deeper and deeper into the system. The formations were truly impressive, columns created over thousands of years by the patient work of water. Delicate stalactites hanging from the ceiling like petrified jewels. Robust stalagmites growing from the floor towards the underground sky. It was when we reached a particularly wide hall that Robert suggested, "Mrs. Patricia, stay here a bit appreciating this space, while Jason and I go check the next stretch. There seems to be a narrower passage up ahead. We want to see if it's safe for you." I sat on a higher, drier rock, grateful for the brief rest. My 4-year-old legs were already accusing the effort of the walk. I turned on my flashlight, which I noticed for the first time was low on battery, and began to observe the formations around. It was then that I heard a whisper that shouldn't have reached my ears, but that the peculiar acoustics of the cave amplified and directed exactly to where I was. A cave is a peculiar beast. Its vaulted structure creates a whispering gallery effect, where sound travels along the rock face like it's on a telephone wire. Those bastards thought they were whispering their dark secrets in safety, but they forgot that in this house of stone, the walls themselves were my ears. "It's now or never." The voice was Jason's. "Are you sure no one will find her? Is this area not monitored?" Robert worried. "I already told you no. And even if they find her, it will look like an accident." Disoriented old woman, slipped, fell into a deeper spot. Common with tourists, imagine with someone her age. Jason's voice was cold, calculating. "Are the documents ready?" asked Robert. "All signed. She trusts her dear little daughter so much, she signed general powers of attorney. As soon as we break the news to Sarah and wait for the initial grief to pass, we start selling everything. The house first, then the land in Pacific Palisades, the apartment we leave for last, so as not to raise suspicions. It's truly chilling to imagine the people you trust most plotting your end while you sit just feet away. But if Robert and Jason think this geography teacher is going down without a fight, they are about to be proven very wrong. You won't believe how she turns their own trap against them. So keep listening." My blood froze. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't the exaggeration of a suspicious old woman. It was real. They were planning to abandon me there, in a remote cave that flooded in the rainy season, which was starting exactly that week. I tried to get up silently, but in the hurry I slipped. My flashlight fell, rolled a few feet, and the light flickered weakly. When I managed to regain my balance, I heard hurried footsteps moving away. "Wait! Come back here!" I screamed, but my voice only produced echoes that mixed with the sound of a muffled laugh, and then silence. An oppressive silence, broken only by the constant dripping of water on the formations and the distant but unmistakable sound of rain starting to fall outside. I wonder if anyone has ever noticed signs that they were being deceived, but ignored them because they trusted too much. Have you ever felt that something was wrong, but went ahead anyway? Share in the comments if you have ever lived a situation where your instinct screamed, but you chose not to listen, because that was exactly what happened to me. All the signs were there: the interrupted conversations, the hidden documents, the insistence on selling my properties, the suspiciously generous gift. My survival instinct, that same one my boatman father had taught me to listen to when the river changed its mood, was alerting me. But I chose to ignore it. I chose to believe that no one would be capable of such cruelty, especially not the men my daughter had chosen for her life. And now I was there alone, with a weak flashlight in a cave that would soon start to flood, with no one in the world knowing where to find me. When the light of their flashlights disappeared completely, I stood in the same place for almost 10 minutes, petrified like the limestone formations around me. I had just heard my own sons-in-law coldly planning my death. My mind couldn't process the betrayal properly. Then came the panic, that hot desperation rising up my throat. I started screaming their names, even knowing they were already too far away to hear me. "Robert, Jason, come back here, you bastards." My voice came back to me, multiplied by the echo, as if the cave itself was mocking my situation. I ran in the direction I thought was the exit, stumbling on rocks, hitting my shoulders on narrow walls, scratching myself all over. The weak little flashlight trembled in my hand, illuminating a few feet in front of me. The air seemed increasingly scarce. My heart was beating so hard I felt it in my throat. After a few minutes in this blind rush, I stopped, panting. I had to calm down. Panic kills faster than the situation itself. That was what I always told students in survival classes in natural environments. Ironic, right? 40 years teaching geography, talking about the dangers of caves, and now I myself was trapped in one. I leaned against the cold wall and slid down to sit on the floor. I forced a slower, deeper breath. "Think, Patricia, think," I murmured to myself. I needed to organize my thoughts. First, where exactly was I? From the formations I had observed at the entrance and the details I managed to catch while we walked, I recognized we were in a part of the region known for hidden canyons. It was an area with several interconnected caves, some with underground rivers that flowed into crystalline pools. But this specific cave, from what I could tell, was not part of any official map. It was further out, wilder, without the handrails, the signs, the walkways usually left in caves open to visitation. With the weak flashlight, I examined the immediate environment. It was a wide hall, with a high ceiling, from which stalactites of various sizes hung. The floor was irregular, with some puddles already forming in the lowest points. On the walls, about 6 or 7 feet high, I noticed dark horizontal marks, clear signs that the water reached up to there in flood periods. And with the sound of the rain outside increasing, it wouldn't be long before the flooding began. I had heard rumors during my master's research about some caves in the region that could fill completely in a matter of hours during strong rains. I forced my mind to work as a professional, not a victim. What did I have at my disposal? I opened my pockets, emptied the small backpack I carried on my back. The inventory was discouraging. The flashlight with low battery, the small Swiss Army knife inherited from my father, a scarf on my neck, a light jacket tied around my waist, a small water bottle half full, and a pack of saltine crackers I had taken at the inn's breakfast. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The immediate priority was to find a safe place to shelter from the flood that would certainly come. Using the flashlight light economically, turning it on for only a few seconds to check the path and then following in the dark, I began to explore the hall, looking for higher points. After about 20 minutes of careful searching, I found a kind of natural platform on the side of the cave. It was a rock formation that projected from the wall about 10 feet from the ground, creating a small, flat area of approximately 20 square feet. I evaluated the stability of the structure using techniques I learned during my field studies. I tapped lightly with the handle of the knife, listening to the sound it produced. A solid sound, without the hollow tone that would indicate internal fragility. I examined the base where the formation connected to the main wall. There were no visible cracks. I ran my hand over the surface, feeling the texture of the stone, dense limestone, not the more porous type that tends to detach. I concluded it was safe enough to support my weight. Climbing up there wasn't easy for a 7-4-year-old lady. My knees protested. My fingers scratched on the rough stone, but the adrenaline gave a vigor I hadn't felt in a long time. I know exactly what you're thinking. How on earth does a 7-4-year-old woman with aching joints climb a sheer rock face? But believe me, pure rage is a type of nuclear fuel. When death is licking at your heels, and the image of those traitors laughing flashes in your mind, your body manages to do things that medical science simply cannot explain. I used small protrusions in the rock as natural support for feet and hands. At some points I had to practically drag myself, feeling my heart beat fast with the effort. When I finally managed to hoist myself onto the platform, I was panting and sweaty, but alive, and more importantly, in a point that seemed safe against the imminent flooding. Sitting on that platform, legs trembling from the effort and fear, I began to assess my situation with more clarity. The flashlight flickered once, twice, and then died completely. I clicked the button frantically, but the darkness was absolute. My primary tool was gone. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat, but I forced it down. I didn't need artificial light to see. I needed to use my other senses. I closed my eyes, ironic in the pitch black, and listened. Above me, I could hear the distinct, rhythmic dripping of active stalactites. That was when I noticed something promising. Several active stalactites, the kind that still grow with the constant dripping of mineral-saturated water. In normal situations, this dripping is extremely slow, a drop every several minutes. But with the rain increasing outside, the infiltration would accelerate the process. This gave me the first idea for survival. Water. I would need drinking water, and the drops falling from the stalactites are naturally filtered by the rock, becoming extremely pure. I unfolded the scarf I had around my neck and extended it like a small hammock under one of the stalactites that dripped more regularly. I secured the ends to small protrusions in the rock, creating a slight concavity in the center where the drops could accumulate. It wouldn't be much, but it would guarantee clean water to drink. The next problem was more complex. How not to get lost in that labyrinth of stone if I needed to move? How to mark paths in the almost total darkness? That was when I remembered something I had noticed while we were walking. Small shiny points embedded in some walls of the cave, quartz crystals. Using my fingers to trace the walls near my platform, I examined the texture carefully. I found a small concentration of these crystals. Using the tip of the knife, I managed to loosen some. They were small, the size of a corn kernel, but they had a valuable property. They reflected light intensely. I kept the crystals in my pocket, planning to use them as path markers if I needed to explore the cave. Even with minimal light, be it from the flashlight in its last breaths or any other source that might appear, these crystals would function as small lighthouses, guiding my return to base camp on the platform. The night, if I can call it that, since in the cave it was impossible to distinguish day and night, was long and cold. The sound of the rain outside increased, and with it the dripping inside the cave. The noise of water running at some more distant point also grew, indicating that the flooding was beginning. I wrapped myself in the light jacket, trying to conserve some heat. I ate only one cracker, knowing I needed to ration to the max. The water bottle I saved for emergencies, counting on the collection system I had improvised for my regular consumption. Sleep was almost impossible. Every sound amplified by the cave echo startled me. The damp cold penetrated my bones, making my knees and back ache like never before. But the worst was the darkness, not that normal darkness of the night, where there is always a little point of starlight, a distant reflection. It was an absolute dense darkness, which seemed to have weight and texture. A darkness that swallowed everything. Colors, shapes, hope. You young folks are often afraid of the dark, but the truth is, darkness is the one place where you cannot lie to yourself. When there is absolutely nothing left to look at on the outside, you are forced to look inward, and that is when I realized, light doesn't just come from the sun. It has to be ignited inside your own mind first. When the flashlight finally died, after a few very brief uses to check the water level, I felt a pang of despair. Now, I was truly blind. I closed my eyes tight and then opened them again, trying to force the pupil to capture any minimal remnant of light. But there was no difference. Seeing or not seeing was the same in that pitch blackness. It was at this moment, in the silence interrupted only by the constant dripping of water, that I began to methodically plan my survival. As a geography teacher, I always told students that knowledge is power. Now, that knowledge would be my only weapon. I concentrated on remembering everything I knew about the caves of the Santa Monica Mountains, the local geology, the rainfall patterns of the region, the typical fauna of cave environments. First, I needed to create a mental map of the space. Even without being able to see, I could use other senses to map the environment. Echo, for example. I clapped my hands and listened attentively to how the sound returned. Faster from one side, slower from another, muffled in some directions, sharper in others. This gave me clues about the geometry of the space, the approximate distances of the walls, the existence of openings or corridors. Then I began to notice subtle differences in air circulation. There were points where I felt a slight current, almost imperceptible, more present. In total darkness, these air movements became more evident to my sensitized skin. And where there is air movement, there is potential for an exit. I mentally marked the direction from which these currents came. The sound of the water also provided valuable information. The rhythmic dripping of the stalactites, the more distant running of a possible underground stream, the occasional splashing that suggested small waterfalls inside the cave. Every sound told a story about the topography of the place. With this information, I began to create a map in my head, using techniques I taught my students to memorize territories. I imagined the space as a large three-dimensional drawing, placing specific landmarks at strategic points. Here, a pointy formation that my fingers had identified. There, a depression in the ground I had felt. Over there, a point where the echo was particularly distinctive. Using this method, I risked small explorations around the platform, always returning to the starting point, always counting steps, always keeping a hand on the wall as a reference. During these limited explorations, I left some of the quartz crystals at key points. Even without light to make them shine at the moment, I knew they would be useful if I managed any future light source. On what I calculated to be the third day, marking time by tying knots in an improvised string made from threads unraveled from the jacket, the first major flood happened. It began with a distant sound, like a prolonged thunder. The noise increased, becoming a continuous roar echoing throughout the cave. Then came the smell, an odor of wet earth, churned mud, exposed minerals, and finally, the unmistakable sound of water rushing with force, rapidly filling the lower levels of the cave. From my platform, I couldn't see the flood, but I felt its consequences. The humidity of the air increased drastically. Drops that were previously sparse became constant, like a fine drizzle inside the cave. The temperature dropped even further, making my fingers numb. And the sound, that sound of running water, was at the same time comforting, because it meant possibility of survival, and terrifying, because it constantly reminded me of the danger I was in. Using my hydrology knowledge, I tried to calculate how high the water could reach. The marks on the walls I had noted before losing the flashlight light suggested a maximum level of approximately 6 feet from the ground in previous floods. My platform was about 10 feet up, which gave me some margin of safety. But what if this rain was exceptional? What if the old marks didn't represent the worst possible scenario? These worries proved well-founded when, a few hours later, I felt water licking my feet. The flood had risen higher than predicted, reaching the edge of my platform. In panic, I felt the wall behind me, looking for some protrusion I could use to climb even higher. I found some bumps that could serve as precarious support. With my heart racing and muscles trembling from cold and fear, I began to climb again, feeling the water rise more and more. It was the most desperate moment of the 25 days I spent in that cave, hanging on a slippery wall, with icy water rising up my ankles, then knees, without being able to see absolutely anything, not knowing if there was anywhere to climb, if the next bump would hold my weight, if the water would eventually cover everything. In that instant, I almost gave up. Almost let exhaustion win and surrendered to the rising water. But then I thought of Sarah, my daughter, who would be devastated by my death. I thought of the children I taught geography to for decades, showing how knowledge of the earth could be liberating. And I thought with a rage that surprised me by its intensity of Robert and Jason. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of inheriting my properties, of continuing their lives as if nothing had happened, of deceiving my daughter with fake grief for the tragedy. That spark of righteous anger is sometimes the only thing keeping us alive when the odds are stacked this high. Patricia is channeling years of knowledge into this one climb, but the water is rising fast, and her biggest challenge is still days away. Don't go anywhere. The survival strategy she comes up with next is absolute genius. This anger was enough fuel to keep me climbing, blindly groping for every small support in the rock, ignoring the pain in my joints, the cut that opened on the palm of my hand, the cold that made my teeth chatter uncontrollably. After what seemed like an eternity, I reached a new ledge, narrower than the previous platform, but sufficient to accommodate me in a sitting position. There, soaked and exhausted, I waited for the water to stabilize. Fortunately, the level stopped rising, about 8 inches below my new position. In the days that followed, the water receded gradually, allowing me to return to the original platform. But that experience of near drowning changed something fundamental in me. It was no longer just a question of surviving by instinct. Now it was a question of justice. I needed to get out of there alive to confront those men, to protect my daughter, to ensure they paid for what they had done. With this new determination, I refined my survival system. I improved the water collector, using not only the scarf but also parts of the jacket lining to create a larger catchment area. I developed a method to count time more precisely, based on the cadence of the drops from a particularly regular stalactite. 50 drops equaled approximately 1 hour, allowing me to mark days and nights more accurately. Hunger was a growing problem. The crackers ran out on the 4th day, and since then my stomach hurt constantly. I tried to ignore the pain, concentrating on other things, mentally reciting poems I knew by heart, recalling mathematical formulas I used to calculate erosion, telling stories out loud to myself, just to hear a human voice in the darkness. It was during one of these tactile explorations that I made an important discovery, a small lateral tunnel I hadn't noticed before. It was too narrow for my whole body to pass, but feeling a stronger current of air coming from it, I understood it could be connected to another part of the cave system, maybe even an exit. Unfortunately, there was no way to widen it with the limited tools I possessed. But the existence of this tunnel gave me hope. It meant the cave wasn't a completely closed system. As the days passed, my body began to change. I lost weight rapidly without food. My senses, especially hearing, touch, and smell, sharpened in a way I never imagined possible. I could distinguish sounds as subtle as the movement of small insects on the stone. My fingers developed incredible sensitivity, capable of detecting minimal differences in the rock texture. My smell identified changes in the air, signaling weather alterations outside. A damper smell meant more rain coming. A drier smell indicated a lull. Around what I calculated to be the 10th day, I made a discovery that completely changed my strategy. During a wider exploration, I found a small vertical crack in the wall of a side corridor. It was narrow, but putting my face close, I felt a current of fresh air stronger than normal. And there was something else. When positioned at a certain angle, I perceived an extremely faint luminosity, so weak that in the first few days, with my eyes not yet fully adapted to the darkness, it would have been impossible to notice. This crack became my natural clock and my calendar. During the day, the light, little more than a very soft graying of the pitch black, allowed me to vaguely distinguish the nearest shapes. At night, the darkness returned to being absolute. This gave me the first reliable reference of time since I got stuck. It also allowed me to calculate what phase of the month we were in, crucial for understanding the rain patterns of the region, which tend to follow specific cycles. Even more importantly, the crack gave me an idea. If that point allowed a little light to enter, maybe it could be used to send a signal out. I gathered all the quartz crystals I had collected and positioned them carefully at the entrance of the crack, so they would reflect daylight to the outside. It was a weak signal, perhaps imperceptible, but it was something. If any hiker passed nearby, maybe, just maybe, they would notice the unusual shine. The second flood came on the 15th day. This time I was more prepared. I had identified an even higher point to shelter. I had marked the path there with strategically positioned crystals. I had even created a small staircase using natural protrusions of the rock that I had memorized through touch. When I heard the distant roar announcing the arrival of the water, I was already on my way to my elevated refuge. This flood was worse than the first. The water rose faster and higher. At some point, it reached the height where I was crouching and continued to rise. I had to squeeze into a vertical fissure, almost a natural chimney in the rock, keeping myself partially suspended for hours. The water reached up to my chest, cold as death. My muscles burned from the effort of maintaining that impossible position, but I held on. I had to hold on. When finally the water receded enough for me to return to my main platform, I was so exhausted I slept almost 24 hours straight. I woke up disoriented, confused, feeling a thirst that burned my throat. My water collection system had been destroyed by the flood. I spent the following hours rebuilding it, now more robustly, using what I learned from the previous experience. Isolation was starting to take its psychological toll. At times, I caught myself talking alone for hours on end, telling stories of my childhood in Sacramento, explaining complex geological concepts to imaginary students, arguing with Robert and Jason as if they were there. The line between dream and reality sometimes blurred, especially in the moments between sleep and wakefulness. But whenever that happened, I hit the stones beside me, feeling the pain in my hands as an anchor in reality. "You are alive, Patricia," I told myself, "and you will stay alive around the 20th day." Although at this point my count could be a few days off, plus or minus, I noticed a significant change in the cave environment. The base water level had dropped considerably, indicating that the rains outside had diminished. The constant sound of the underground stream became more discreet. The humidity of the air, although still high, was no longer so oppressive. These were signs that the intense rainy season was giving a respite. This encouraged me to make wider explorations. Using my mental map of the cave and the crystal markers I had spread, I ventured into corridors I hadn't explored before. It was on one of these incursions that I found something that gave me the first real hope of rescue. A wide room where the ceiling had a natural opening. Not big enough to pass through, but enough for daylight to enter, forming a distinct beam for a few hours. That light, after almost 3 weeks in near total darkness, was like a miracle. I stood under the sunbeam, feeling the heat on my skin, really seeing my skeletal hands, broken nails, partially healed scratches and cuts. I cried like a child before that simple gift I previously took for granted: sunlight. But more than emotional comfort, that opening offered practical possibilities. During the period when the light entered directly, I could see the surrounding environment clearly. I noticed the room had several interesting formations, including a particularly large concentration of quartz crystals on one of the walls. Using the knife, I extracted as many as I could, creating a small collection that shone intensely under direct light. I positioned these crystals strategically around the opening, so that, even when the sun wasn't directly over it, any light would reflect and amplify. I also created a sort of distress signal on the floor, directly under the opening, arranging larger crystals to form a large X, the universal danger symbol that could be seen from above if anyone flew over the area. That room became my second camp. I spent the daylight hours there, absorbing the sun, recharging not only my debilitated body, but also my hope. In periods without light, I returned to my original platform, where my water collection system worked better. If you are managing to follow this story up to here and believe you would have the same strength to survive, leave your like. Now let's see how many people really would have the cold blood to face 25 days of darkness and uncertainty. Your like is your vote of confidence in your own inner strength. Because I'll tell you something. No one knows what they are capable of until they are thrown into a situation like this. I myself, a retired geography teacher who spent days tending plants and reading books, never imagined I could endure so much. But we keep inside us a strength we don't even know we have. The last days in the cave were of a strange calm. My body had adapted to constant hunger. Weakness was part of me now, just as darkness was. I had developed routines that gave structure to my days, periods of exploration, periods of rest, moments to collect and drink water, hours to stay under the sunbeam in the opening room. My mind oscillated between moments of crystal clarity and periods of disorienting confusion. Sometimes I wondered if that had become my new permanent reality, if I would live the rest of my days in that underground world. On what I calculated to be the 25th day, something changed. The sound. From the beginning, I had gotten used to the sounds of the cave, the dripping water, the distant echo, the occasional displacement of small stones. I knew this symphony by heart. That's why, when I heard a different sound, something rhythmic, artificial, my whole body contracted in alert. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, one more trick of the lonely mind. But the sound persisted, became clearer. They were voices, human voices. They were distant, probably at the main entrance of the cave. I gathered all the strength remaining in my malnourished body and began to scream, "Help! I'm here! Help!" My voice, hoarse from little use and partial dehydration, seemed weak to my own ears. But caves are treacherous in the way they conduct sound. A whisper can travel hundreds of yards through the right tunnels, while a scream can be muffled by a curve in the rock. I picked up a loose piece of stalactite that had fallen during one of the floods and began to hit the stone wall, creating a distinct rhythm. 3 quick beats. Pause. 3 quick beats. The international distress signal. Between the sequences of beats, I screamed again, alternating between moments of intense noise and periods of absolute silence when I strained my ears trying to catch any response. It was during one of these silences that I heard it. Weak, distant, but unmistakable. A shout answering mine. Is someone there? After 25 days of absolute darkness, that human connection feels like a miracle. But while the physical survival is nearly over, the battle for justice is just beginning. Patricia has a score to settle, and her return to civilization is going to be anything but quiet. Tears ran down my grimy face. After 25 days, another human being, I was no longer alone in the darkness. I intensified the sound signals, screaming louder, hitting harder. The voices seemed to approach, albeit slowly, groping through the stone labyrinth. I began to move in their direction carefully, using my mental map and crystal markers as a guide. It was risky to leave the safety of my platform, but the possibility of rescue was worth any risk. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw something I hadn't seen for almost a month. Artificial light, the beam of a strong flashlight dancing on the distant walls of a corridor. The light was so intense it hurt my eyes adapted to the darkness. I put my hand over my face, protecting my vision, but continued advancing in the direction of that lighthouse of hope. I screamed again, now with renewed urgency. The light changed direction, pointing directly to the corridor where I was, and then I saw them. 3 figures, wearing helmets with flashlights, climbing gear, rescue backpacks, speleologists, not tourists, not common guides, but specialists in cave exploration, people who knew exactly what they were doing. When the first of them reached me, a man with a gray beard and gentle eyes, I couldn't speak. I just collapsed, my legs finally giving way under the weight of relief. "How" was the only word I managed to murmur as he wrapped me in a thermal blanket, while the other team member spoke quickly into a radio, while the third opened a water bottle and offered it to my parched lips. "The crystals," he replied, pointing to the markers I had spread. We saw the reflection from above in the natural opening. It's not normal to see that kind of shine in unexplored caves. We decided to investigate. My heart almost exploded with gratitude. My knowledge of geology, the quartz crystals, the opening in the ceiling, everything had united to save me. The rescue itself was complicated. I was too weak to walk alone. They needed to improvise a stretcher to carry me through the narrow corridors, through the flooded halls, through the precarious passages. Every jolt on the irregular stone sent waves of pain through my debilitated body. But it was a welcome pain. It was the pain of returning to the world of the living. When I finally emerged from the cave, the sky was already darkening. The fresh air, loaded with the smell of wet earth and vegetation, invaded my lungs like a reinvigorating tonic. The colors, the green of the vegetation, the blue of the sky, the orange-red of the setting sun, were almost painfully intense after so many days in the monochromatic world of darkness. I closed my eyes, overloaded by so many stimuli, but with a smile on my lips. In the rescue helicopter, while a paramedic checked my vital signs and inserted an IV to start rehydration, I asked a crucial question: "What day is today?" When she answered, I confirmed what I already suspected. I had spent exactly 25 days in the cave. 25 days that seemed like an eternity and an instant at the same time. 25 days in which I died and was reborn several times. And as the helicopter lifted off, taking me back to civilization, to light, to life, I made a silent promise to myself. This didn't end here. Robert and Jason didn't know, but they had committed a fatal error in their plan. They chose the wrong terrain for their betrayal. They tried to use nature against me, without realizing that nature had been my teacher and ally all my life. And now that same nature had given me a second chance, a chance for justice, a chance to protect my daughter from the true darkness, not that of the caves, but the one that lives in the hearts of men like them. In the hospital, I learned something that chilled my blood more than the 25 days in the cave. While the doctors treated the severe malnutrition, dehydration, and multiple wounds on my body, a nurse commented unpretentiously, "You gave everyone a scare. Your family had even already put the death announcement in the newspaper." It was as if the ceiling collapsed on my head one more time. Those bastards hadn't wasted time, hadn't even looked for my body properly, and were already burying me. I asked that no one notify my daughter or sons-in-law about my rescue. The nurse thought the request strange, but when I whispered, "They tried to kill me," her eyes widened and she nodded. We agreed that to the outside world I would be just another unidentified elderly woman, an accident victim, until I decided what to do. I needed this time to recover and, mainly, to think about the next step. While IV bags dripped nutrients back into my skeletal body, I mentally replayed every detail of the days in the cave. How the geography I taught for 40 years had become my unexpected ally. It was on the 18th day, when I was already accepting the idea that I would die in that hole, that the turning point happened. I was exploring a narrow corridor I hadn't noticed before, when my fingers, already incredibly sensitive after so many days in the dark, felt a different current of air. Following that faint breeze, I found a vertical crack in the rock. It was too narrow to pass through. My arm would barely fit, but sticking my face as close as possible, I noticed something extraordinary. Light, a soft clarity, filtered but unmistakable. The crack extended to the surface. The air coming through there also brought distant sounds of the outside world. The wind in the trees, occasionally a bird. And most importantly, it allowed me to see the sky, a small cutout of blue or gray, depending on the weather outside. That crack became my calendar, my clock, my connection to the world beyond the darkness. During the day, the penetrating light allowed me to vaguely distinguish surrounding shapes. Night returned to complete darkness, but the most valuable thing was being able to observe the clouds. As a geography teacher who explained climate systems to generations of students, I could read those clouds. Their formations, colors, and movements told me when a storm was coming, which meant flooding in the cave. This gave me precious time to prepare for the next flood, saving my life. I also created a system to count time more precisely. I had noticed that one of the stalactites dripped with almost perfect regularity. I positioned below it a small natural vessel in the rock, where water accumulated until it overflowed. Each cycle of filling and overflowing took approximately 40 minutes. Counting these cycles, I managed to mark the hours with surprising precision. With scratches on the wall made with the tip of the knife, I kept the record of days. This system gave me a mental anchor, preventing temporal disorientation from driving me to complete madness. But perhaps the most important discovery was the crystals. During my tactile explorations of the cave, I found several quartz formations embedded in the rock. With the knife, I managed to loosen some of these crystals. In the darkness, they seemed like common stones, but when a minimum of light hit them, be it from the crack during the day or later from the flashlights of my rescuers, they shone intensely, reflecting and amplifying the light. I realized I could use these crystals as flares. I began to position them strategically throughout the cave, marking safe paths, high points to escape floods, and mainly, around the small opening in the ceiling I discovered subsequently. There, I arranged the larger crystals to create a distinctive pattern that could catch the attention of someone passing overhead. It was a desperate bet, but in my situation, any chance, however small, was worth the attempt. Rescue came, in a form I can only call destiny. A group of speleologists, scientists who study caves, was doing a mapping of the region. They weren't looking for me specifically. According to what they told me later, they saw an unusual shine coming from a fissure in the ground. It looked like a small underground lighthouse, said the team leader, a man named Michael. We had never seen anything like that in natural formations. Guided by scientific curiosity, they decided to investigate. They went down equipped with all the safety apparatus, ropes, helmets, powerful flashlights, communication equipment. The shine came from my crystals, strategically positioned to reflect daylight. When their powerful flashlights illuminated the crystals, the effect was amplified, creating a glittering path that led them to me. The moment I heard human voices after almost a month alone in the darkness, there are no words to describe it. I thought I was hallucinating, but when the beam of the first flashlight cut through the pitch black in my direction, I fell to my knees. I was saved. Against all odds, against the meticulous plan of my sons-in-law, against implacable nature, I had survived. Lying in that hospital bed, with tubes providing nutrients to my debilitated body, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Robert and Jason immediately. I wouldn't run to tell what happened. That would be too easy for them. Denial, alibi, done. My word against theirs. The natural distrust people have against confused old people. No. I needed something more forceful. I needed to catch them red-handed, with their hands in the dough, as they say. Using the hospital phone, I made some strategic calls. The first was to Susan, my friend of 50 years, former college classmate, who became a respected lawyer in Los Angeles. When I summarized what had happened, she gasped in horror. "Patricia, that's attempted murder. We have to go to the police now." I convinced her to wait, to follow my plan. Reluctant, she agreed, but insisted on coming immediately to the hospital. Susan arrived the next morning, accompanied by a retired police private investigator, Frank, whom she knew from previous cases. Her trust in him was total. If there's something dirty happening with your properties, Frank will find out, she guaranteed. The man, of firm build despite his 60 years, listened to my story in silence, only occasionally asking pointed questions. At the end, he nodded gravely. "Mrs. Teacher, you taught my daughter in the 8th grade. She is an engineer today, because of you. I will find out everything those scoundrels are up to." While I recovered in the hospital, kept as an unidentified patient, Frank worked. Using his contacts, he discovered that Robert was already discreetly announcing the sale of my house in Santa Monica. The price, well below market value, clearly a strategy to sell fast. He had also initiated the process to represent the estate on the land in Pacific Palisades, the most valuable of the 3 properties. For this, he was using a general power of attorney that I had actually signed years earlier, when I got sick with pneumonia and needed someone to resolve banking issues for me. Frank also discovered something that gave me chills. Robert and Jason had taken out a life insurance policy in my name 8 months before the surprise trip to Malibu. An insurance with a very high value with them as beneficiaries, justified as protection for medical care in old age. Except the insurance had a specific clause covering accidents in tourism activities. Everything planned, meticulously calculated. It chills you to the bone to realize this wasn't just a sudden impulse, but a cold, 8-month calculation. They bet everything on a tourism accident, but they forgot to account for the one variable that matters: Patricia's resilience. Now that the trap is set and the evidence is piling up, you won't want to miss the moment she springs it on them. But the worst came when Frank followed Jason to a high-end real estate firm in downtown Los Angeles. He discovered they weren't just waiting for a death certificate. They were acting now. They were using the general power of attorney, the one I had signed years ago for banking during a hospital stay, to authorize the immediate liquidation of my assets under the guise of securing funds for emergency search and rescue. It was a loophole. They were holding a closing meeting to sign over the Pacific Palisades land rights in 4 days. When I learned this, my plan took definitive shape. Instead of reporting them immediately, I decided to appear at the reading of the false will, appear literally as a ghost to those who wanted me dead. Some of you might say I was being reckless, or perhaps a bit too dramatic. I should have just called the police immediately, right? But after 25 days of hell, I felt I earned the right to see the blood drain from their faces with my own eyes. What about you? If you were in my shoes, would you choose safety? Or would you choose sweet, poetic justice? Be honest with me in the comments. Susan tried to dissuade me. "Patricia, this is too risky. What if they try something against you again?" But I was determined. I want to see their faces when they see me. I want my daughter to see their reaction. Only then will she believe. In the days leading up to the reading of the will, I prepared. Physically, I was still weak. I had lost almost 33 pounds in the cave. My muscles were atrophied, my skin marked by wounds in various stages of healing, but my mind was sharp as never before. Frank guaranteed security. "I'll be there with 2 trusted colleagues. No one will lay a finger on you." Susan took care of the legal part, gathered all the necessary documentation to prove the fraud, prepared formal complaints that would be filed immediately after the confrontation, coordinated with a district attorney who would be on standby to issue preventive arrest warrants. On the morning of the will reading, I looked at myself in the mirror of the small apartment Susan had arranged for me to stay hidden in. I barely recognized the woman staring back. The face was thinner, highlighting the cheekbones, the eyes strangely deeper and more alive at the same time, as if the darkness of the cave still lived there, mixed with an iron determination. My hair, previously completely gray, now showed almost white streaks at the temples. But it wasn't a look of defeat. It was the look of someone who had been to hell and back to tell the story. The law firm was in an old building in historic downtown LA. We arrived early, positioning ourselves strategically. Frank and his 2 colleagues, all armed discreetly, he assured me, blended in with the staff and people circulating the place. Susan stayed in a car parked across the street, with all the documentation prepared, ready to jump into action. I stayed in a small room, adjacent to the official reading room, with the door ajar. From there, I could see and hear everything without being seen. Punctually at 10 a.m. they arrived. The reading of the will was pure theater. I watched from the adjacent room as Jason checked his watch, looking bored, while Robert feigned comfort to my weeping daughter. When the lawyer placed the deed transfer documents on the table and said, "Given Mrs. Davis's prolonged absence and the presumption of the tragic accident, this sale is necessary to manage her estate," I signaled Frank. He nodded and pushed the heavy oak doors open. I didn't rush. I walked in slowly, the tap-tap-tap of my cane echoing on the wooden floor like a judge's gavel. This is the moment of poetic justice we have all been waiting for. Patricia walking back into that room isn't just a return from the dead, it's a masterclass in reclaiming power. Stick around to hear exactly what she says to the men who left her to die. It is incredibly satisfying. Robert was mid-sip of his water. The glass shattered on the floor. Jason froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the river. Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. I walked straight to the head of the table, looking not at my daughter, but directly into the eyes of the men who tried to bury me. "You made a calculation error, gentlemen," I said, my voice raspy but steady, filling the silent room. "You thought you were dumping a senile old woman into a hole. You forgot you were putting a geologist back into her element. The earth didn't want to kill me. It wanted to tell me your secrets." I placed the bag of quartz crystals on the table, the very ones that saved my life. They clattered like bones. "And now, I'm here to bury you." The irony didn't escape me. Someone called an ambulance. Jason tried to escape discreetly through the side door, but was detained by Frank's men. The notary watched the scene open-mouthed, holding the supposed will as if it were a venomous snake. Susan entered then, taking control of the situation with the authority that only a lawyer with 30 years of experience possesses. "Gentlemen, we are facing an attempt at fraud, falsification of public documents, and, more gravely, attempted murder. I request that no one leave this room until the arrival of the police, who are already on their way." While the ambulance took Robert away and the police handcuffed Jason, I took Sarah to a quieter corner. Between tears and sobs, I briefly told what had happened, how her husbands had taken me to a remote cave in the Santa Monica Mountains, how they had abandoned me there, knowing the place flooded in the rainy season, how they had calculated that my body would never be found. "I don't believe it. It can't be true," she repeated, dazed. But the expression on her face showed that deep down she did believe. Probably many pieces that didn't make sense in her mental puzzle began to fit together. The whispered conversations between the husbands, the documents quickly hidden when she entered the room, their insistence that I sell my properties. "Why, Mom? Why would they do that?" she asked, voice choked with shock. "Money, my daughter. The 3 properties your father and I built with so much sacrifice, the house in Santa Monica, the apartment in Westwood, the land in Pacific Palisades, all added up, a few million. For men like them, enough value to try to kill me." The following hours were a confusion of statements, documents, medical exams to prove my state after the rescue, and the formalization of the complaint. Robert survived the heart attack, unfortunately, as Frank commented in a moment of raw sincerity, and was detained in the hospital itself, under police guard. Jason spent the first night in jail denying everything, claiming there was a terrible misunderstanding and that I had gotten lost accidentally. The impact on local media was instant. "Retired teacher survives, 25 days in cave after being abandoned by sons-in-law." It was the headline of the main newspaper in Los Angeles the next day. My phone didn't stop ringing. Former students, professional colleagues, distant acquaintances, all wanting to confirm the unbelievable story, all offering support, but the true hell was just beginning. The judicial process dragged on for months. I had to relive every detail of those 25 days of darkness, now under the blinding lights of the courts. I had to hear the absurd defenses of their lawyers, that I had dementia, that I had gotten confused in the cave, that I was seeking revenge for family disagreements. The evidence, however, was damning. The life insurance, with the specific clause for accidents in tourism, the sales ads for my properties made when I was still missing, not officially dead, the fake will with a signature that experts proved to be forged, the testimonies of local guides who confirmed that Robert had asked specifically about remote caves that flood in the rainy season, and most devastating, the text messages exchanged between the two, recovered by technical forensics, explicitly discussing the plan, referring to me as the problem that would be permanently resolved on the trip. Sarah, my poor daughter, crumbled upon seeing those messages read aloud in court. How could she not crumble? In a matter of days, she lost everything. The trust in her husbands, the family she thought she had built, the security she thought she possessed. Sitting beside me during the hearings, she often squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I never complained. That pain was our point of connection, our path to reconstruction. The final judgment occurred almost a year after my rescue from the cave. The sentence was harsh. As we expected, Jason, considered the main mentor of the plan, received 20 years for attempted qualified murder, fraud, falsification of documents, and conspiracy. Robert, with mitigating factors for heart problems and what his lawyer called genuine regret, which I never believed for a second, got 15 years. The judge, a stern middle-aged woman who reminded me of my old principal at the school where I taught, was particularly incisive in her final statement. The defendants betrayed family trust, but coldly calculated the death of an elderly lady out of pure material greed. More serious still, they used their knowledge about nature, caves, seasonal rains, as a weapon. Presuming the victim wouldn't have the intellectual or physical resources to survive, they gravely underestimated an educator who spent her life teaching exactly about these natural phenomena. The justice served here is merely a pale reflection of the poetic justice already manifested by Mrs. Patricia's heroic survival. When the sentence was read, and the now ex-sons-in-law were led away in handcuffs, Sarah cried silently beside me. Not tears of sadness, I realized, but of relief, as if an immense weight had been removed. Later, at home, she confessed to me, "I knew, Mom. Deep down, I knew there was something wrong with them. Little lies, inconsistencies, the way they treated you when they thought I wasn't looking. But I ignored all the signs because it was easier than facing the truth." My relationship with Sarah changed deeply after all this. In the first few months, she almost didn't leave my side, as if fearing I would disappear again. She moved temporarily to my house, sleeping in the old room that had been hers in adolescence. At night, I often found her in the kitchen, staring at nothing, trying to process how her life had collapsed so completely. I also had my nights of insomnia, of course. The darkness that was previously just the natural absence of light now carried the weight of memories from the cave. I slept with a small light on, unable to tolerate complete pitch black. I started at sounds of running water. I had nightmares where the walls closed around me, where the water rose to my neck and there was nowhere to run. But, curiously, these physical and emotional scars didn't leave me weaker. On the contrary, I felt an inner strength I had never known before. Whoever survives 25 days in a floodable cave, using only knowledge and determination, discovers a power most people will never know. About 6 months after the trial, I took a decision that surprised many, but seemed perfectly natural to me. I sold the land in Pacific Palisades, ironically the same one that had sparked Robert and Jason's greed. With the money, I bought a smaller, more practical house in the town of Ojai, near Santa Barbara. I needed a fresh start, a place without the painful memories that Los Angeles now carried. More importantly, I used a significant part of the value to create a geological study center focused especially on cave safety. I hired speleologists, including Michael, the man who led my rescue. We developed educational materials for tour guides, safety protocols for visitors of karst areas, training for rescue teams. The nature that had almost been my tomb now became my purpose. Sarah eventually returned to Los Angeles, resuming the dental office she now managed alone. The experience changed her deeply. She became more cautious, more observant, but also more determined to follow her own path. We talk daily by phone, and she comes to visit me in Ojai every 2 months. Our relationship, tested by the fire of betrayal, emerged stronger and more authentic. When I reappeared in the law firm room and saw Jason's face turning white as paper, he murmured that I should be dead. Do you think I did right planning my appearance that way? Or should I have called the police immediately after being rescued? What would you do if you discovered your family planned your disappearance? Sometimes I wonder if the theatrical impact of my appearance was necessary. Maybe it was more sensible, safer, to have gone straight to the authorities. But something inside me, maybe that same strength that kept me alive in the darkness, needed to see their faces. I needed my daughter to witness their reaction upon seeing me alive. Words can be denied, reports can be questioned, but that moment of pure terror in Jason's eyes, that was the confession no lawyer could refute. The story of my survival gained a reach I never imagined. I was invited to give lectures at universities, in training programs for firefighters, in geology congresses. I always started by telling how academic knowledge, those classes that so many students thought useless for real life, had literally saved my life. How knowing how to read rock formations, understand hydrological patterns, recognize quartz crystals, had been the difference between death. In the lectures, I show the crystals I kept from the cave, the same ones I used as flares. I keep them in a small velvet case, like the precious jewels they are. When the spotlight hits them, they shine intensely, casting small rainbows on the walls. It is an almost magical moment in the presentations, when the audience viscerally understands how those small mineral fragments reflected the light that eventually saved me. I also show my father's Swiss Army knife, now quite corroded by the cave humidity, but still functional. I carried this with me out of sentimentality. I always explain, I never imagined it would become my most valuable tool. I tell how I used the various functions, the blade to extract the crystals, the small chisel to create markings on the walls, even the toothpick as an improvised instrument to test the stability of certain rock formations. A few months after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Robert, written from prison. I opened it with trembling hands, not knowing what to expect. Confession? Regret? More lies? The content surprised me. There were no explicit requests for forgiveness, nor dramatic declarations of remorse. Instead, an almost clinical analysis of what had happened. I thought I was underestimating you because of your age, he wrote. Actually, I underestimated your intelligence and determination. I didn't consider that a geography teacher would have exactly the knowledge needed to survive in that specific environment. It was a calculation error that cost my freedom and my family. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now why we failed where we were certain of success. I didn't answer the letter. There was nothing to say. His confession wasn't about moral regret, but about frustration over a poorly executed plan. He still didn't understand, maybe would never understand, that the true error wasn't underestimating my knowledge, but believing that the value of a human life could be measured in square feet of land. Jason never wrote. From what I heard from Sarah, who occasionally received news through lawyers, he remained in denial, claiming he had been manipulated by Robert, that he didn't really know what was happening. The human capacity for self-deception never ceases to impress me. A year and a half after the rescue, I returned to the cave, not out of masochism or to relive the trauma, but as part of a documentary on safety in extreme natural environments that I was helping to produce. Equipped properly this time, with experienced guides and all necessary lighting, I retraced the path I had walked blindly so many times. It was a surreal experience. With adequate light, the cave revealed itself to be simultaneously familiar and strange. I recognized formations I had seen only with my hands. I identified the plateau where I had set up my first camp. I found some of the crystal markers I had left, still shining when the light hit them. But the most impressive thing was realizing the distances. What had seemed like an infinite labyrinth in the darkness revealed itself to be a relatively compact system. Areas that took me hours to explore groping in the dark could be crossed in minutes with visibility. The main guide, a young speleologist named Tyler, was impressed with my detailed knowledge of the location. "You mapped all this in the dark?" he asked, incredulously. I explained how I had used other senses, echo to calculate distances, touch to identify formations, smell to detect wetter or drier areas. It's like I've been teaching my students for decades, I said. Geography isn't just about memorizing capitals and rivers. It's about reading the landscape, understanding the processes, connecting with the environment completely. The visit to the cave provided a type of closure I didn't even know I needed. Upon leaving, looking at the small entrance that had been impossible to find alone in the darkness, I felt a strange gratitude, not for the 25 days of suffering, hunger, and fear, of course, but for the revelation of an inner strength that I might never have discovered under normal circumstances. Today, at 78 years old, I lead a life I never imagined for my retirement. I divide my time between the geological study center I founded, the lectures I give around the country, and the small garden of my house in Ojai. My hair is completely white now. It changed almost overnight after the rescue, as if the cave had left its permanent mark on me. The research on cave safety we started has already helped save lives. 3 years ago, a group of tourists, trapped by a flash flood in a cave in Tennessee, was rescued using techniques we developed. When the leader of the rescue team called me to tell of the operation's success, I cried like a child. Every life saved is a victory against those who tried to take mine. Robert and Jason continue serving their sentences. Sarah, who finally concluded the divorce after years of legal procedures complicated by her ex-husband's criminal situation, rarely mentions their names. She rebuilt her professional life, expanded the office, even started seeing a history professor she met at one of my lectures. Life goes on, as it always has, like the river my father taught me to respect back at the beginning of this journey. There really is no greater revenge than living a life of purpose while your enemies sit in a cell of their own making. Patricia didn't just survive. She turned their weapon into a shield that is now saving lives across the country. Stay with us for her final, beautiful reflection on what it truly means to find light in the darkness. Sometimes, on clear nights in Ojai, I go out to my porch and look at the stars. During those 25 days of darkness, I dreamed of them. Bright, distant, constant. I imagined what it would be like to see them again, feel the fresh night air, hear the sounds of the outside world. Now, when I contemplate them, I remember that even in the deepest darkness, there is always a way. Sometimes it is made of knowledge, sometimes of courage, often of pure stubbornness. And while the crystals I brought from the cave rest in a small box on my bedside table, shining softly under the lamplight, I know that the true light never came from outside. It came from inside, from that fierce determination to not only survive, but to guarantee that the truth, like those crystals, reflected so intensely that no one could ignore or deny it. In the depths of that cave, in the Santa Monica Mountains, I lost many things. Weight, physical strength, the illusion of family security. But I gained something much more valuable, the absolute certainty of my own power, and that no darkness can ever take from me. Whoever passes today by the entrance of the River Delta Geological and Environmental Study Center, right there in the Westwood neighborhood, close to UCLA, perhaps doesn't imagine that that beautiful building with a light facade was born from a story of darkness. But that's exactly how it was. When I won the settlement from the lawsuit against my ex-sons-in-law, a considerable amount defined by the judge as reparation for moral, physical damages, and attempted qualified murder, many people thought I was going to use it to travel, to rest, to finally have the quiet old age I deserved after everything I went through. But resting was never really my style, you see. Even before that trial in the cave, I was already known as the retired teacher who didn't know how to stay still. So, I took a good part of that money and bought a large lot on Wilshire Boulevard, close to the university where I graduated so many decades ago. The place had been an old event venue that went bankrupt. It stood abandoned for years, full of weeds, and with the structure deteriorating. Just like me when I came out of the cave. Abandoned, deteriorated, but with a structure that deep down was still firm. The architects wanted to demolish everything and build something new from scratch. I put my foot down. No, we are going to use what already exists. Renovate, adapt, give new life. Because that was also the lesson I learned in the depths of the earth. We don't need to destroy to rebuild. Sometimes it is in the old foundations that we find the support for something new. It took almost 2 years between purchase, design, renovation, and equipment. But when we finally inaugurated the center in 2026, I felt I had closed a circle. The name River Delta wasn't for nothing. I wanted to honor the river that marked my childhood in Sacramento, where my boatman father taught me the first lessons about geography long before any professor. That river that changed, that sometimes overflowed, that sometimes almost dried up, but always found its way, just like I found mine, even in the most complete darkness. The center was born with three main purposes that I established from day one. First, applied research in karst geomorphology, the study of cave formations for laypeople. Second, development of safety protocols for natural risk areas, focusing on the caves of the Santa Monica Mountains. Third, and perhaps most important, environmental education for children and adults, using my experience as a teaching tool. I hired a small but dedicated team. Young geologists, eager for field research, experienced speleologists, including Michael, the man who led my rescue team, environmental educators with degrees in biology and geography, and to my surprise, an impressive amount of volunteers, many of them my former students, who upon learning of the project showed up wanting to help in some way. "You taught geography to my mom in the 80 seconds, said one. "My uncle still keeps the map you helped him make in 7th grade, told another. I confess that often I didn't remember the faces or names, but they remembered me, and that moved me deeply. The first big project we developed was the Canyon Safety Protocol in caves. I gathered the best specialists I could find, speleologists, geologists, experienced tour guides from the region, firefighters specializing in remote area rescue. For 6 months, we did meticulous work mapping the main tourist caves of the canyons, identifying critical points, escape routes, areas with flood risk, early warning signs for dangerous conditions. I remember the first meeting when I presented my goal. I want no one else to go through what I went through, neither by accident nor by malice. One of the most experienced tour guides, a gentleman of about 60, gray beard and sun-tanned skin, looked at me seriously and said, "Mrs. Patricia, I've known these caves since I was a boy. I've seen tourists get in trouble. I've seen inexperienced guides get people into a jam. But what they did to you? It was the first time I saw nature being used as a weapon." That phrase stayed with me. Nature as a weapon. That was exactly what Robert and Jason had done. Transformed something that should be a source of beauty and knowledge into a tool to kill. The protocol was ready in less than a year. A document of almost 200 pages with detailed maps, safety procedures, checklists for guides, risk classification systems for different caves according to the time of year and weather conditions. We presented it to the California Department of Tourism, to the local guide associations, to the fire department. It was officially adopted by the state government 6 months later. Today, no guide can take tourists to the caves of the Santa Monica Mountains without specific training based on this protocol. Accidents decreased drastically. But perhaps the work that gave me the most personal satisfaction was with the fire department. It all started when Captain Anderson, from the search and rescue group, sought me out after a lecture. "Mrs. Patricia, you survived in conditions that would have killed many experienced people. Would you like to share this knowledge with our teams?" At first, I hesitated. I didn't consider myself a survival expert, just a stubborn old woman who refused to die. But he insisted, "You combined technical knowledge with adaptability and mental strength. It's exactly what we try to teach." I ended up accepting. We developed a specific training program for cave rescue teams. We called it Integrated Method of Survival and Rescue in Cave Environments, a pompous name that the officers loved, but among us we affectionately called the Patricia Method. The differential was combining traditional technical knowledge with improvisation and adaptation techniques based on my experience. I taught how to identify safe points in a cave using only touch when there is no light available, how to evaluate the stability of rock formations with minimal resources, how to build improvised flares using natural reflective materials, like the crystals that saved me, how to maintain spatial orientation in complete darkness, and perhaps most importantly, techniques to maintain mental sanity in situations of extreme isolation. Seeing those strong firefighters, mostly young, listening attentively to a lady over 70, was quite a scene. Sometimes I caught one of them looking at me with an expression that mixed disbelief and admiration. Doubting I survived. "Son," I asked directly in my way. Usually came the hurried excuses. "No, Mrs. Patricia, it's just that," and I completed, "It's just that it doesn't seem possible." I know. Even I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't lived every minute. The program with the firefighters expanded to other states. I was invited to give similar training in Nevada, Oregon, Colorado, all states with important karst formations and cave tourism. Every time I received news of a successful rescue, using techniques I helped develop, I felt that all the suffering in the cave had somehow been worth it, that the universe had transformed that terrible experience into something that now saved lives. But not everything was work and public mission. I also had to rebuild my personal life, mainly my relationship with Sarah. The first months after the trial were difficult. My daughter oscillated between moments of almost desperate closeness, when she wouldn't leave my side, as if fearing losing me again, and periods of distancing, almost hostility. I understood that, besides processing the near loss of her mother, she was dealing with the complete destruction of the image she had of her ex-husband and the family environment she built. One night, almost a year after the trial, Sarah appeared at my door without warning. She was crying, visibly shaken. "Mom, I can't stop thinking. What if I had noticed? What if I had listened to you when you said they were acting strange? You never would have gone through that." It was the first time she spoke openly about her own guilt in what happened. Until then, we had danced around the subject, talking about practical details, legal procedures, moving on. I did what any mother would do. I hugged my girl tight, who was past 40, but in that moment seemed again like the scared child after a nightmare. And I said with all sincerity, "It wasn't your fault, my daughter. It was their choice, only theirs." We talked the whole night, for the first time, really processing together not only the trauma, but the small clues that were always there, the signs we ignored, the intuitions we suffocated in the name of family well-being. It was the beginning of our true reconciliation, not the superficial closeness of the first months, motivated by shock and fear, but a genuine reconnection, based on truth, however painful it was. Sarah started therapy soon after, something I recommended from the start, but which she resisted. Seeing her gradually recover her autonomy, her confidence, her capacity for discernment, was one of the greatest joys of my post-cave life. 3 years after the rescue, I decided it was time to revisit the Santa Monica Mountains, no longer as a victim, but as a specialist, as an educator. We organized a scientific expedition with geology students from UCLA, some of my researchers from the center, and, of course, experienced guides, strictly following our safety protocol. Sarah wanted to accompany me, despite the understandable fear she felt of the place. "I need to exorcise this ghost too, Mom," she said with a determination I recognized as my own. "It takes a special kind of bravery to voluntarily walk back into the nightmare that nearly tore your family apart." But seeing Sarah stand there with that same fire in her eyes proves that resilience really does run in the blood. Let's follow them as they step back into the darkness, this time on their own terms. We arrived at the canyon base on a morning of clear sky, so different from that cloudy day when I was taken to the trap. The area remained beautiful, with its rustic charm. We stayed at the same inn as before, a deliberate choice of mine, part of the process of resinification. The owner, upon recognizing me, turned pale. "Mrs. Patricia, you came back." It was as if he had seen a ghost. I explained I was there for work leading a scientific expedition. He insisted on giving us the best sweets, on offering a special dinner. The guilt stamped on his face was palpable. After all, it was from his inn that I left never to return, at least in my sons-in-law's plan. The expedition lasted a week. We visited several caves, including some near the one where I was stuck. But purposely, I left my cave for the last day. When the time finally came, I felt a mix of anxiety and strange serenity. Equipped properly, this time, helmet with powerful flashlight, technical clothes, communication equipment, experienced guides. I entered that space that almost was my grave. It was a surreal experience. With adequate lighting, the cave revealed itself to be simultaneously familiar and completely strange. I recognized formations I had seen only with my hands during 25 days of darkness. I identified the plateau where I set up my first camp, the crack through which entered that minimal trickle of light that served as my calendar, the room with the opening in the ceiling, where I positioned the crystals that eventually attracted my saviors. It was here, I told the group accompanying me, touching a specific formation on the wall. Here I found the first quartz crystals I used as flares. One of the students asked hesitantly, "Missus, Patricia, how did you manage to orient yourself in complete darkness?" I smiled. When we lose a sense, the others sharpen. My ears learned to see through echo. My fingers became eyes, reading the stone as if it were a book in braille. My whole body became a compass, feeling the subtle changes in temperature, the air currents. Sarah stayed silent during almost the entire visit, observing everything with wide eyes, occasionally holding my hand tightly when we reached a point I indicated as particularly challenging in my story. When we left, hours later, she hugged me for a long time at the cave entrance, under the hot California sun. "Mom, I can't imagine how you survived here. It's a miracle." I kissed her forehead like I did when she was little. "It wasn't a miracle, daughter. It was knowledge. It was determination. And it was a lot of anger at the scoundrels who put me here." That visit to the cave marked a turning point, both for me and for the study center. We filmed the entire expedition, documenting in detail every aspect of the cave, every survival technique I improvised, every sign I interpreted. The material turned into an educational documentary that today is used in schools, universities, and rescue training centers all over the USA. Geographies of Survival, as we call it, has already won 2 environmental education awards and is being translated for international exhibition. In the following years, the River Delta Center grew beyond my initial expectations. What started as a personal project of resinification became a national reference in geological research applied to safety. We received funding from government agencies, partnerships with international universities, invitations to participate in expeditions in cave systems in other countries. Gradually, I started delegating more responsibilities to the team I formed, assuming a more consultative and less executive role. After all, even the most stubborn old woman from Sacramento has to admit when the body asks for a quieter rhythm. One of the questions I am most asked in lectures and interviews is about my current relationship with my ex-sons-in-law. People are especially curious because, unlike what many would expect, I never fed a speech of hatred or revenge against them. Justice, yes. I worked tirelessly to ensure they were convicted and paid for what they did. But hatred is like that dark water that flooded the cave. If you allow it to rise too much, it ends up drowning you too. Robert wrote a few more times from prison over the years. His letters evolved from a cold analysis of the calculation error he made to deeper reflections on the choices he made in life. I don't know if it is genuine regret or just the boredom of incarceration that leads him to these introspections. I respond occasionally with brief and factual letters. I don't feed the grudge, but neither do I offer the comfort of easy forgiveness. It is a delicate balance I found, acknowledging his humanity without absolving his actions. Jason is another story. He never showed any sign of real regret, only resentment for being caught. In the rare times he tried contact, there was always a subtext of accusation, as if I were to blame for him being in prison and not his own actions. Eventually, he stopped trying. I heard from Sarah that he developed serious psychological problems in prison, alternating between deep depression and bursts of rage. I don't wish him ill, but I also don't feel responsible for his well-being. Everyone reaps what they sow, as my mother used to say. Did I forgive? It's a complex question. I prefer to say I freed myself from the weight of hatred without releasing them from responsibility for what they did. It's a type of forgiveness, I suppose, but a forgiveness without reconciliation, a forgiveness that doesn't require me to accept them back into my life or pretend nothing happened, a forgiveness that is more for my benefit than theirs. Throughout these years of work with the center, of lectures around the country, of training and research, I crystallized 3 great lessons I always share. These are learnings the cave taught me, and that apply not only to extreme survival situations, but to the daily life of any person. First lesson: knowledge saves lives. Literally, those geography classes I taught for 40 years, which some students thought boring or irrelevant, were exactly what kept me alive. Knowing how caves form, understanding flood patterns, recognizing stable rock formations, identifying quartz crystals, all this made the difference between life and death. That's why I always tell young people, Never underestimate the value of knowledge, even that which seems furthest from your immediate reality. You never know when it might become your lifeline. Second lesson: observing is different from seeing. In the complete darkness of the cave, I saw more clearly than many people with perfect vision. I learned to use all senses, to perceive subtle patterns, to notice imperceptible changes in the environment. In the illuminated and noisy world we live in, we are bombarded with visual stimuli, but frequently we don't really observe. We don't notice the signs, the patterns, the inconsistencies. How many of us ignore that strange feeling about someone, that something isn't right, that our intuition screams just because our eyes see nothing wrong? I ignored those signs about my sons-in-law and almost paid with my life. Third lesson: patience is a powerful weapon. In the cave, I learned that some battles cannot be won with strength or speed. The water rose, and no amount of struggle or desperation could stop it. I had to wait patiently for it to go down. The crystals that saved me didn't shine immediately. I needed to place them strategically and wait for the right light to find them. Even my revenge, if I can call it that, came through patience. I didn't run to the police at the moment of rescue. I waited, planned, chose the perfect moment to reappear and ensure justice was complete. Patience is not passivity. It is the art of choosing the right moment to act. Today, at 77 years old, I look back and see how those 25 days of absolute darkness illuminated the rest of my life. They gave purpose to the years I have left, brought clarity about what really matters, showed me an inner strength I didn't even know I possessed. It is ironic to think that Robert and Jason, by trying to bury me in that cave, actually planted a seed that bloomed in shared knowledge, in saved lives, in a legacy that will continue long after I depart. I like to use the metaphor of the cave itself to explain this transformation. Caves have two entrances, one through which we are forced, and another we choose to create. I was forced to enter that darkness by betrayal and greed, but the exit, that one I created myself with knowledge, determination, and that characteristic stubbornness I inherited from my boatman father. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. We cannot control all the dark entrances of life, but always, we can work to create our own exits to the light. Recently, we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the River Delta Center. It was a beautiful party, with the presence of researchers, former students, local authorities, and, of course, Sarah, who now directs a nonprofit focused on psychological support for victims of family violence. During the ceremony, a young geologist from the team surprised me with a special gift, a small sculpture in quartz crystal, representing the cave that almost was my tomb and ended up becoming my rebirth. When the light hits it at the right angle, it projects a pattern on the walls that reminds exactly of the flares I created to attract my rescuers. That gift occupies a prominent place in my living room today, in the simple but cozy house I keep in Ojai. It is a daily reminder that the same substance, be it the crystal, be it the human experience, can remain hidden in darkness or can reflect light, depending on how we choose to position it. I chose to transform my darkness into light. I chose to make those 25 days not a black hole of trauma and resentment, but a lighthouse guiding others in their own metaphorical caves. When I look back at the girl from Sacramento accompanying her father on the boat along the Sacramento River, at the determined young woman who was the first in the family to attend university, at the dedicated teacher who taught geography for 4 decades, at the mother who almost died from her sons-in-law's greed, at the survivor who transformed trauma into purpose, I see not breaks or ruptures, but a continuous flow, like the river of my childhood, which changes constantly, but continues being the same river, following its inexorable course to the sea. The darkness of the cave taught me that our true nature reveals itself not when everything is illuminated and easy, but when we are in complete pitch black, groping for a path, depending only on the internal resources we have accumulated. In those moments, we discover that we are much more than we thought we were, that we carry within us ancestral strengths, intuitive wisdoms, fierce determinations we didn't even suspect we possessed. That's why I never tire of telling this story. Not to brag about unlikely survival, or to relive the drama of betrayal, but to remind especially older women that we are much more than the stereotypes society projects onto us. We are not just fragile grandmothers, lonely widows, confused ladies who need to be taken care of. Red, controlled by others. We are complete human beings, with knowledge accumulated over decades of life, with adaptability proven in countless crises, with a tenacity that many young people envy. When I speak to audiences of women my age, I see recognition in their eyes. Maybe they haven't been abandoned in floodable caves, but many know other forms of darkness. Abandonment, abuse, social invisibility, disrespect disguised as protection. And many, like me, found ways to create their own exits to the light, to transform trauma into purpose, pain into legacy. If you who are listening to me now are going through your own cave, whatever it may be, I want you to know there is always a way. Sometimes we can't see it immediately. Sometimes we have to create this path with our own hands, groping in the dark, using knowledge we didn't even remember we had, but it exists. And when you finally emerge into the light, you will discover that you are no longer the same person who entered the darkness. You will be stronger, wiser, more connected with your true essence. Today, when students at the center ask me if I'm afraid to return to caves for research, I smile and answer, "Boys, I spent 25 days in complete darkness, without food, drinking water drop by drop, surviving floods that almost drowned me. All because of the betrayal of those who were supposed to protect me. After that, what else could scare me? And it's true. The cave taught me that the worst has already happened, and I survived. Anything after that is just another challenge to be overcome, another problem to be solved with the same methodology I used there. Observation, knowledge, patience, and that characteristic stubbornness that young people today call resilience. When people ask me if I regret anything, I answer that only one thing: not having trusted my instinct more from the beginning. That little inner voice that said something was wrong with my sons-in-law, that the conversations interrupted when I entered the room weren't a coincidence, that the quickly hidden documents meant something sinister. If I could go back in time, I would have paid more attention to those signs. I would have investigated more. I would have protected not only my material assets better, but my daughter from men like those. But the past cannot be changed. Only the future is in our hands, and that's why I dedicate what is left of my life to teaching others to read, not only physical geography, but the human geography around them, to notice signs of danger, to trust their instincts, to use knowledge as a tool for protection and liberation. Because in the end, that is what true education is about, not memorizing facts, but acquiring the tools to navigate both the natural world and the social world with safety and purpose. The cave tried to swallow me, but instead, it revealed me. Never underestimate the strength of a woman who has walked through the storm, and more importantly, never underestimate the value of an education. You see, knowledge isn't just for passing college exams. It is the armor that protects you when life backs you into a corner. Revealed a woman who doesn't bend easily, who transforms knowledge into survival, who uses darkness not to hide, but to shine even more intensely. That is the Patricia who emerged from those 25 days, not a victim, but a force of nature, as relentless as the water that molds the cave, as resistant as the rock that sustains it, as brilliant as the crystals that reflected the light that saved me. I am Patricia Davis, and this is the story of how the geography I taught for 40 years became my lifeline when they tried to turn me into a statistic. If you want to know more stories of women who transform traps into paths, subscribe to the channel Grandmas of America, because every wrinkle on our face tells a story of resistance that can illuminate your own path. Sometimes, when the night is especially clear, I go out to my porch and look at the stars. I remember how I dreamed of this view during those days of absolute pitch black, how I imagined if I would ever see the night sky again, feel the wind on my face, hear the song of the birds, and I feel deep gratitude, not only for being alive, but for being alive with purpose, with clarity, with a mission that only I could accomplish. 25 days of solitude within the cold stone were not just a battle for survival, but a journey of spiritual rebirth. Absolute darkness stripped away my ordinary sight, yet it awakened a different kind of vision within me, one that pierced through the deceitful nature of the human heart and tapped into a depth of inner strength that had long lain dormant. I realized that we are never merely weak victims of circumstance. Instead, we are like stones tempered by the storm. The more we are ground down, the sharper we become. The greater the pressure, the more brilliant the clarity. Nature did not betray me. Only people did. And it was the profound silence of the cave that taught me the greatest lesson of all. The path to the light always lies within our own will. If this journey of rising from the abyss touches your heart, please hit subscribe so we can spread the truths that must never be buried.